Hello, I'm Stuart Bowes, and you're watching or listening to the Net Hero podcast. This is a podcast for you if you care about what we're doing to the planet. You don't have to be an eco-warrior. We believe business is the solution to making things better. But we're for people who want to make that difference by either cutting their emissions or coming up with ideas that can help us do things a bit better. We've featured politicians, academics, lots and lots of business people, entrepreneurs, inventors, and of course people who are just interested in doing the right thing. So sit back, listen and enjoy, and make sure you subscribe to the podcast. Please share it with your friends and colleagues, and you can always check out our two websites that cover all of this, Energy Live News and futurenetzero.com. This podcast is purely editorial, so sit back and enjoy this week's episode. I've got a little kid, and his favourite game is The Floor is Lava. Now, if you've got little kids, you'll know what this is. It's a pain in the arse game, where he thinks that he can jump from sofa to sofa because the floor is boiling. Now, I've been very lucky to have gone around the world and seen real lava, and it's amazing. I was up at Etna, seeing an eruption. It's most primordial version of the Earth, isn't it? The energy you get from the heat of a volcano. A lot of people have been looking at this power for centuries. It's called geothermal energy. You'll heard of places like Iceland which use it quite regularly. But there aren't that many volcanoes in the UK. Well, not active ones, there's a few dormant ones. So can it really be a power source we can use here? Well, I've met a man, an ex-punk rocker, who's going to show you how you can get a tune out of geothermal. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Karl Farrow, who's the CEO of a company called Seraphy Energy, exploring geothermal for us to use as a regular power system. Karl, thank you for joining me on the Net Hero podcast.
Thank you. Yeah, good to be here. Thanks very much.
Let's start with geothermal. I mean, I gave a very idiot's view of it, like it's lava and it's hell. What is geothermal energy? Because I think most of us think it is that. It's just lava and it's really... But there's loads of different kinds of geothermal, isn't there?
Yeah, I was one of them actually, probably up until about 15 years ago, just thinking, you know what, you hear of plants around the world and things operating, but you don't really think of it as an energy that we can use everywhere. But actually, when I got into it, I was quite astounded that geothermal actually is everything really below 400 or 500 meters in depth. Most of the geothermal systems and plants that are around the world are operating at that depth, quite shallow to be fair, but in hot rock environments, meaning that, you've got anomalies where you've got seismic or volcanic fractures which reach the surface nearer, they're not deep as such. So geothermal is really just, as it says, it's in the geology. It's thermal energy that is radiating from the core of the earth up to the surface, and some places that gets to the surface quicker through anomalies, and others it's sort of fairly standard and set. So we work on the average sort of temperatures of 30 degrees a kilometre across the globe, but obviously in hotspots like Iceland, volcanic islands, etc., that can be significantly less than that and a lot hotter, a lot shallower. But it's everywhere. It's and that's what astounded me. Coming from oil and gas, drilling wells around the world in oil and gas. One thing we have in every single well is temperature, and you go the hotter it gets, effectively. So
yeah, because I think that's an interesting way of explaining it. Because I think most people know kind of a little bit about the Earth's geology, that there's this thin crust, which is still miles and miles. So as you go deeper, the easiest example is the tube. You go on the tube and it's bloody hot because it's underground. Is that basically, as you go, but is the heat really all the volcanic heat, or is there heat just kind of in the rocks, in the water? What's the kind of heat that heats the Earth as you go down and down?
So the Earth in the middle, as we all know, is molten lava. And that's, you imagine it like a battery. It's radiating out all the time. If the Earth cools down, we're effectively history. The Earth won't operate if it cools down. So it's radiating out. It's been around for 4-point-something billion years, and it's probably going to last us at least another 6-point-something billion years from estimate. So it's quite a long while, We're not going to run out of it, put it that way. The temperatures that are radiating out are consistent and all the time, so it doesn't change. So once you
Right.
find a hot spot in the ground,
Yeah.
that temperature, even if you're extracting fluids out of it, will never cool down. It might drop a little bit, but it won't cool down. So it'll always recharge fairly quickly, actually. What we've found in our sort of workings over the last sort of 5 years is that shallow ground source heat pumps, which a lot of people are familiar with in their homes, etc., generally they're drilled down to 150 meters, 100 meters type thing. And what you're pulling up there is really solar radiation or solar energy from the sun.
Oh, right. Okay, so the Earth gets heated by the sun. It's the heat that just circulates down, basically.
You get this sort of, although it's still in the ground, so you could say, well, it's geothermal. The actual first few hundred meters of the Earth are actually warmed up by solar, so they're actually warm by the sun.
Wow.
You get this bit of hot area, which is the surface, which is a few degrees. As you go deeper, it gets a few degrees hotter than ambient temperature. But then the deeper you get to a point of around 400 to 500 meters, where you get this transition point, which is everything then below that is coming from the center of the Earth.
Right.
And one of the things we've noticed, even you might hear people saying, well, I had ground source heat system fitted, and it's lasted for 20, 30 years. It's all great, etc., etc. And then you have other people say, well, I had it fitted and it didn't work because it started to go down, etc. The problem is a lot of these wells are drilled quite shallow, so they might be drilled to 100 meters, which you only get roughly about 4 to 6 degrees at that sort of depth. And because we have climate change in our environment, winters are getting cooler and summers are getting hotter, and etc., etc. The Earth and the seasons are changing. So what happens is that outside temperature, then the heat you were pulling out of the ground, a bit like air source heat pumps work. When air source heat pumps are working, which is effectively like a big air conditioning unit, they're pulling energy from outside and effectively cooling that down or heating it up to get to a temperature. So if you have a big variation, like in the UK, we do have a big variation in temperature in our sort of annual cycles. Winters, in the single digits, summers sometimes up in the 20s, 35s, etc. That means your air source heat pumps has to work significantly more to compensate for that outside energy.
Gotcha.
Ground is always the same temperature, so the ground source doesn't have to work so hard because it's always the same temperature.
With that temperature you were talking about there, you mentioned that up to, did you say about 100 meters?
Yeah,
it's just the Earth being warmed by the sun, and then after that is the energy you see in rocks is, because I get the feeling that geothermal is just always hot water, right? It's water that's heated and it comes up and you use something to generate power. Is it always water, or you don't actually use lava, do you? What do you actually use to get that?
So effectively, you get to a certain point where you get to what they call basement or solid rock, which is granite, various things like that. That's a great conductor of heat. So what that acts is, it's effectively like, it's effectively acting like an oven. It's continually hot. And what happens is the water systems actually flow through that, so they naturally get hot. We've got a lot of water under the surface. People don't realise, most of our drinking water, etc., is coming through wells and stuff under the ground, etc. So we get a lot of water, although we do catch water, obviously, from rainwater, etc. The fluid that's in the ground is either saline, meaning it's a salt-based fluid coming from the sea, or it's a natural fluid coming down from mountains, etc., and it goes into the geology and it's in there. That heats up, and what happens, you've got two conventional sort of kinds of geothermal in the sort of process currently operating around the world for power. You've got the natural aquifers, like you see in the geysers in California and things like that, where you tap into a system which is in the ground and you're producing that system, that fluid. That fluid, contains lots of different minerals and stuff. It's flowing all the time and it's hot, and you use that to turn a turbine and create electricity. And then you've got what they call enhanced geothermal, where you drill down to a hot rock environment, normally with an injector well, and you inject fluid into that, which then goes through the permeable layers in the ground, and it heats that up and then comes out.
Sorry to just stop you there. So system one is, people have seen hot geysers and all that. You just go there, you tap in that water that's already coming up. The second one, you actually inject water in, do you, to get hot, to heat up in the rock?
Yeah, so they call that enhanced geothermal. So what they do is they drill an injector and a producer well, could be several hundred meters apart, and they'll inject cool fluid into the formation. And that formation is normally several hundreds of degrees. And what that does is heats up the fluid, and it naturally then escapes out of the producer well, which then again turns a turbine and creates electricity. The next generation of that is what we've developed, which is called closed loop, which is basically where you drill down to a known temperature,
Yeah.
and you circulate the fluid round a system in the ground, which is effectively closed. So effectively, if you imagine putting a pipe, straight pipe down into the ground about, 1,500 meters, 2 kilometers. Yeah. What we do is we then circulate down the inside of that pipe, and then we have another pipe in the middle, and that pushes the fluid back up to the surface and effectively going around in a continual loop. And what that's doing is then just heating up, we're using the natural ground around it, the formation around it to heat that water up. And our systems run very slow. So their action is through conduction. Convection is where you get a carrier fluid like water that takes energy to the surface. Conduction is where you're actually drawing the heat from the subsurface into a fluid. So there's two types of sort of energy forms that are produced. One is natural through convection, and the other one is sort of induced through conduction.
When it does this, particularly the first one, I get convection quite easily. The water's hot, and off it goes, and it comes out. And we've all seen those. They go pretty fast, so it's instantaneous. When you do the other form, where it's that closed conduction, how long does it take for the fluid to warm up? Is it days? Is it months? How does it work?
So what we've done, so if you take the two different examples, enhanced geothermal and then the closed loop that we're doing. So enhanced geothermal, you are putting significantly higher volumes into the formation, and generally targeting temperatures of, several hundreds of degrees. So you effectively get what I call sort of supercritical water temperature. So you're evaporating fluid effectively rapidly into this formation, which is coming out, like a geyser squirting out of the ground. Right. Then that energy is actually used. A closed loop system is a lot more engineered and a lot more designed to act like a heat exchange process. So you're flowing the liquid down a lot slower. It's normally in smaller volumes. And normally, if you can imagine, a 1,500 meter deep pipe in the ground, which is what we generally use as our sort of starting heat exchange process, that's flowing down maybe a few liters a second. So, it takes several minutes to get to the bottom. So a bit like a kettle, when you switch it on, it's warming up. Yeah. It gets to a certain point. So the water's actually warming up as it's going down, and it gets to and at the bottom, you never really change that temperature. The bottom's always, whatever the bottom hole temperature is, 1.5 kilometers, probably around 45 to 50 degrees, which we use for community heating type project. But then if you were doing that, we've got a project in the Caribbean, power generation, at that sort of depth. In the Caribbean, we're getting about 170, 180 degrees, because it's a volcanic island. So we are getting far higher temperatures at that depth. Geology does change across the globe, but what we've tried to do is create a system that can be used everywhere and anywhere to produce a fixed amount of energy at a certain depth and with a certain calorific value of energy conversion to be able to use it commercially or, domestically into a property or whatever.
It's brilliant. Really good explanation. On the other side of it, up ground, I assume it's the same thing. All of them the same. It's some sort of turbine that spins and generates electricity, or is that different as well, depending on where you are in the world?
Yeah, no, that's absolutely the same. I think what we are moving away from, and I've seen, and we are seeing this in the industry, geothermal is not something, it wasn't a word on someone's sort of heating sort of agenda a few years ago, but it's certainly coming out into the limelight. And as you've seen in the last few years, the IEA, EIA, and a few others are coming out with sort of really pushing geothermal to the forefront. And really, that's where I see geothermal playing effectively 100% role in direct use heating and maybe even cooling in the future, and possibly making up to probably 30 to 40% of our power generation mix forward. What I think we will do is start to move away from higher temperature geothermal systems, i.e. conventional systems that were running on steam turbines and that type of thing, and move towards more organic sort of Rankine cycle type machines, which are thermal engines effectively, which can produce electricity at lower temperatures, but in smaller volumes. So what you'll end up having scattered big power stations around doing 40, 50 megawatts up to 100 megawatts or more in areas where you have got, good temperatures for extraction of fluids. And there are quite a lot around the world. More and more are being discovered all the time, even in the UK. So we have got the ability to do power generation in certain areas in the UK, and there'll be a project in Cornwall probably coming online this year, for United Downs project, which will be our first UK power generation project, which will produce roughly about 2 megawatts. I think you will see more of in the next, 5 to 10, 15 years is more small microgrid solutions from geothermal producing power and heating and cooling in sort of newer developments, smart cities, smart towns, these types of things, because we have a grid system which is to some extent grid locked for getting renewable energy into it. We have a system which is predominantly still regulated off the back of fossil fuels, i.e. gas. And I think a lot of people are realizing that to break that mold, we need to go into a island solution, i.e. off grid, and try and create something which is a little bit more customer beneficial, and I think you'll have a mix of both. So you'll have the grid bit being done, i.e. wind farms, solar farms, and all that. Alongside that, I think we'll start to see a lot more, should I say, island solutions, which is what we're focused on predominantly, coming out and to try and help smaller communities, which really are at the end of these renewable energy connections at the moment. So, and we've seen it, firsthand with some of the projects we're developing. Unfortunately, we still have energy poverty. People think is that we've got expensive energy, but actually energy poverty, we've got people in our communities that are still burning, whatever they can on big Arga ovens or whatever they are.
Yeah, I want to go through some sort of rapid fire questions I think the listeners and viewers will be interested in. Let's talk about the carbon footprint of this, which is always a very important thing, right? People have heard of fracking and all the stuff that goes on there. The liquid that you put down to heat up, first of all, what is that? And is there loads of chemicals? How dangerous is it for the environment itself? Or is it just water?
Yeah, so we use just water. Sometimes it's saline based, meaning it's got salt in it, which is in the natural formation everywhere anyway. And, that system is just flowing around. Because we're using plastic pipe as well in most of these installations down to that depth, we have a very low carbon footprint. Plastic's far more conventionally, shall I say, CO2 invasive than steel and metal.
Yeah.
We're putting plastic down. It's also recyclable. It also lasts, 300 or 400% longer than steel. So lots of benefits there. So yeah, the idea of designing a system in plastic and using salt water or corrosive or in normally corrosive fluids like salt water, we don't have that issue of corrosion. We don't have an issue of scaling and things like conventional geothermals have. There's a lot of issues with conventional geothermals because of scaling, because of sort of corrosive aspects, minerals, etc., being brought up from the natural fluids, where they do have to continually treat.
Yes. Yeah.
And,
so using more chemicals to treat the chemicals sort of thing.
Absolutely, yeah. And you've got to do quite a lot of work over with rigs and cleaning, wells regularly and all sorts of things. So yeah, it's quite intensive. Hence, again, why we've sort of pulled away from the conventional approach and looking at more of a closed loop system, which is more of a what I call engineered solution, as opposed to trying to rely on a sort of Mother Nature sort of approach with trying to find a needle in a haystack, shall I say?
Yeah. Next question: how big is this thing? So, can you paint a picture in our minds of, is it like a massive well that's 100-foot high with, like people think of oil wells? Is it a small unit like the size of a car? What would it be if I saw one of your geothermal wells? What would it look like?
Yeah, so when it's fully installed and in the ground, a single well is 2 car parking spaces. So it's literally...
Oh, wow.
And, we are designing systems now subterranean, so effectively the actual workings on the surface, which is a small wellhead about, half a metre high, with some pipes coming off it, that effectively can be underground as well. So, working with things like, projects like National Health or, maybe university campuses, etc., where they have got limited space in cities, we're looking at putting systems in car parks underground so they aren't seen and they can still use the car park and things like that.
So it's not a massive build at all then?
No, not at all. No. I mean, the actual energy centres we use are the size of an 8x6 container, or 6x8 container.
I saw the one in Iceland, very famous, the Blue Lagoon. Massive, like a proper power station.
Yeah. Well, the thing is with the conventional approach, you do need to rapidly cool the fluid because it's that hot. You have to cool it. So a lot of the build is in the cooling towers and the cooling fan. that you need to cool the fluid. And obviously that's then electrically intensive. You've got lots of power to, because we're dealing with what we call ambient loop systems where, we're bringing fluid up, between, 60 degrees at the bottom of the hole up to the surface at sort of 25 to 35 degrees Celsius, which is effectively a usable temperature in a property straight away. By the time it's gone round its system and gone back into the well, it's then dropped to maybe 10 degrees or something. So we're not, we haven't got the need for that big cooling, etc. And our systems are running on 3 or 4 kilowatts, watts per hour. So they're not huge. I mean, it's no different than run the kettle for a day.
That's really crazy. Next question. The temperature difference is great. You just mentioned is not that much. How long does it take to put one of these things in, and how quickly can you generate power? And you talked about the heating. Are you generating hot water that has to go into pipes to warm a house, or are you generating electricity that can go anywhere?
Breaking that down into 3 different questions there, I think. But breaking that down, so the first one, I mean, what we're trying to do is build something which is really inintrusive, so something which can be connected to a normal property today. But most people have a gas boiler or some sort of boiler with coal or oil or whatever. That's generally connected to your heating system, which would normally be a wet system anyway. All we do is really replace that with what we call a small heat pump, and the heat pump is the size of it's about half the size of a normal boiler, combi boiler, to be fair,
right,
for a small property anyway. And that heat pump would then be connected to our, should I say, ring main or loop, which was continually flowing fluids around.
Gotcha.
And what happens is because we're providing a feed temperature of like 20 degrees, 25 degrees to the heat pump all the time, the heat pump I always sort of look at it like the kettle's always on. It's like 75% on all the time. And when you do need that boost of energy for your heating, you've only got to sort of top it up. So that system is very what they call coefficient performance. It's got a very high coefficient of performance because the energy input is significantly less than the energy output, meaning that the performance is far greater. And where a standard air source heat pump that we're seeing might work with between 2 to 4 on a COP, we're getting 8, 9 on the sort of systems we're putting in and developing because of the continual base load temperature we can draw. Even in the winter, it's still at sort of 20 degrees as such.
So thinking about most people's radiator, or depends obviously on your family, because I have certain people who want to put the heat up a lot at night. But they say a house can be comfortable in the winter between sort of minimum of 18 to sort of 20, 21. So you're saying with these heat pumps, they're at 25 anyway.
Yeah.
Even if you really feel the cold, it only has to go up to 26, 27.
And the thing is, we're working with a lot of passive builds at the moment where actually we're in the sort of debate on whether we need a heat pump. So if you've got a passive build and you want to try and create an ambient temperature of, let's say, 16 or 18 degrees, 18 being the sort of target really, and you can do that all year. But the benefit there is also in the summer you can keep the system running. You've got cooling effect because what you're doing is pushing warm air through convection back out of the property because the bottom of the ground's cool and it's naturally pushing the warm air up. So it's got a sort of two-prong approach, and we're working with a couple of hospitals at the moment designing a sort of multi-phase system which can work between a low temperature but actually provide a heating and a cooling aspect on a base load all year round basis, sort of covering roughly about 85% of their energy needs. And then with the concept of just putting a couple of air source heat pumps in there to boost their energy needs in the winter when they need that slow peak or that slightly peak to get them to a higher temperature when it's a cold day or whatever. And what we're finding with that is you increase the performance even more because you've got an all year round system which is just ticking over, producing the same all year round. Energy changes when you change temperature. So if you try to phase something and go up and down with it, that's when you get energy spikes and energy differentiation.
Yeah. My builder always tells me that. Just keep it on.
Yeah, so what we've done with doing community engagement with some of the communities we're working with on our sort of heating systems is, explaining to some of the older people that they don't have to worry about the heating now. They can just literally leave it on and they'll pay the same all year round no matter what.
That's brilliant.
And even in the summer, just open a window. If you're too hot, open a window. Don't turn the heating off. Leave it on.
Yeah, leave it on. Yeah. You've answered my next question already through this conversation, but we can do it here. Yeah, we can do it here because everyone thinks it's Iceland, it's lava, it's Yosemite. You said the Caribbean islands, but there's enough heat in the ground in Britain to do this?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the projects we're looking at in the northeast now, North Norfolk specifically, are very high temperatures. We've got 8 sites which we're developing up in North Yorkshire. We've got a number of sites we're now looking at, additional ones we're looking at taking over. But most of the areas we're looking at are above average in temperature. So the UK, in most cases, we're looking at is around 36 to 38 degrees a kilometre.
Bloody hell.
And, even down in Cornwall, we're looking at maybe 55, 54 degrees a kilometre in some cases because it's granite based and it's a good conductor. They use geothermal a lot in Paris, around the sort of Paris region, at quite shallow depths to do heating. And actually the formation that overlaps the southern coast of the UK is what they call the Paris Basin. So it's the same geology as that, which makes it a good conductor for energy. But, we haven't found, we've looked at over 200 projects in the UK in the last few years, and we've not found one that isn't suitable and can't be developed into a geothermal system.
Next question. This is all about business, and the people who are listening and watching this are in business. Can they think of geothermal as something, the way that people think about putting solar panels, if they've got, like you said, a public building like a hospital or even a big factory or warehouse? Could they now think about, actually, get Karl over, he drills a little hole in my car park, and I can have a more small kind of geothermal? I mean, is it really a possibility for a power source, the way businesses can look at installing solar or a small turbine or whatever? Is this what you think can happen?
So what's happening today, or at the moment, is we've got there's a UK incentive to look at what they call zoning, heat zoning.
Yes.
That's ongoing. There's a number of most big cities are now looking at heat zoning, and that's something I think that will naturally just happen over the next few years. There'll be, those that can be connected to heat networks, district heating type systems will be, and most of the heat will come from either waste heat recovery or geothermal or something like that. But again, we're targeting this from the other end of the spectrum, looking at really the people that really aren't on the network, aren't in the big city, and aren't having
off grid, basically.
Effectively, the forgotten few, shall I say? Well,
it's a big thing because there's people using oil boilers, and like that, and wood burners out in the country, and that's their only option.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we're targeting is that area, and absolutely we can help them. What we're doing is community projects where we can go in and effectively build we'll install the system, get everything up and running, and work on a heat as a service type agreement for them to be able to connect to. So it's definitely something that we can do. We are doing it, and I think it's something we plan to scale going forward. I mean, certainly local authorities, what we're finding with a lot of them is they have they're able to get cash and funding for things like capex to build or to do energy transition processes. But actually, the big problem they have is in the OPEX. So they can't get funding for OPEX, whereas we can provide a baseload energy with a really low OPEX cost and actually fund that system up front and then just sell them the energy. That actually drives their OPEX costs down and allows them to free up capex to then invest into other critical stuff that they might.
Hang on. Yeah, sorry, I don't want to interrupt you, but this is a very interesting point. So you're doing sort of like a PPA, a power purchase agreement, where you can go to a rural community or you can go to a local authority and say, actually, we can give you this, and it doesn't affect the top line because we'll just buy the revenue we get back over the years at last.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's. And the benefit with that is, as well, is obviously it doesn't have to then be sold as a kilowatt to the customer, and you haven't got all the troubles of people trying to understand their bills with different times of the day, with different types of prices, etc. You can just put them on a connection fee and charge them a service fee for connection, and that's a one-off payment every month or whatever they pay. And and effectively, there's no reason why we can't effectively forecast that for the next 25 years and actually give them a monthly rate, and they know what they're going to pay for the next 25 years. So, I don't understand why our energy system is so complex. It's actually it's been made more and more complex the more we've got into an energy transition. I think, it's still driven by gas, obviously, in the wholesale market. So, what we want to try and do is pull away from that. So we want to try and build systems that are off-grid, community, or cooperative driven. So, power for the people, as I say, on Elfie Smith back in the 70s.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I think, I honestly believe there's that we can do that, and I honestly believe that companies like us are willingly out there trying to do that, making
Brilliant.
money for shareholders, but at the same time building a system and a process which actually looks after consumers and customers and making them feel that they're part of the stakeholder engagement. So.
We're going to run out of time in a second, but just two quick last things. This is an interesting point. There's all the pipe work there. There's the gas pipes we've got, the fossil fuel infrastructure. Could some of that be repurposed for geothermal at less cost? Do you know what I mean? Could you use the same things? Because I get what you're saying, that you haven't used plastic and everything, and that there will be a cost and everything like that. Is there a way of using what's already in there? Because gas pipe works are being changed to plastic.
We've already taken that step further. We've now purchased a number of assets from oil and gas companies which are onshore in the UK, and our first projects will be using end-of-life oil and gas wells where we've actually plugged the reservoir and isolated the connection to the oil and gas and hydrocarbon basin, and just using the pipe in the ground, i.e. the drilled well, as effectively a conductor to install our system to then circulate fluids around. So projects we're using are actually using end-of-life oil and gas.
That was what I was going to ask, because if the hole's already been dug, you could just use it, can't you?
Absolutely. So we have 12 wells. 8 of them we're currently looking to reuse for community heating projects up in North Yorkshire. We're also now looking to acquire a number of other sites across the UK and actually work with them for the same process. The other good thing is they help reduce the technology risk and go-to-market risk, obviously, because you've got the wells there, you haven't got to drill them. But these sites are quite big. So as I said, you can get a well, 2 car parking spaces. So you can put lots of other wells on there and then start attracting maybe other developments around some of these rural sites. Instead of trying to build on the edge of cities, try to grow some of the smaller communities up. So you're actually creating more jobs and creating more, social well-being around some of these smaller communities. I think one of the interesting things that we've found through our community engagement with some of our project is the amount of young families and people moving out of smaller rural areas because they haven't jobs and haven't got opportunities moving into cities. Whereas if you have the energy in place, we can attract businesses, attract farming, attract agriculture, attract whatever to these regions. I mean, one of the projects we're looking at is a distillery on the site and things like this. So you actually can then build a business case around it to attract a business to a rural area, which then creates jobs in that rural area, etc. So there's a lot to be said for the social impact, as well as obviously the commercial and the well-being impact for energy poverty.
Well, before we end, what's your plans for Serify? I think you're doing a brilliant job, by the way. It's fantastic. It sounds great. It sounds like super rock and roll energy to me. But what do you hope in the next kind of 5 years, and not just from your business point of view, but the wider kind of uptake of geothermal?
I think just carry on doing as much as more of what we're doing now, really. Is just, I mean, there's 2 sort of ways I look at it. One is advocating for geothermal, to keep pushing it and educating people. I spend most of my week doing that, to be fair. And it's really exciting. It's good. A lot of people are, there's a too good to be true element in it, I think, for a lot of people. But it is a reality. I think we've totally under-missed I wouldn't say under-missed it. We live in a commercial world where people look at, how do we make quickly, and obviously oil and gas has stepped in and made a huge change in the way we do things today, through technology and innovation and et cetera, over the last 50, 70 years. We can't live without it. We're addicted to the stuff now. Everything we use around us is made out of it. But what we can do is move to a cleaner energy source with other things. And I think what we're missing out of our renewable energy space at the moment is that base load. And when we think 50% of our energy is consumed through heating and cooling, why are we looking to electrify our heating with air source heat pumps when we can dig into the ground a few meters and pull up heat, which is infinitive and there forever, and actually going to then allow us to get to net zero with electrification a lot quicker with EV and electric cars and all the other things that actually do require electric, So I think there's a big opportunity there. I want to see this scale across the globe. That's our goal, is to drive this to a multi-gigawatt business model and effectively give those access who want access to it everywhere around the world.
Very punk rock. I love it. Karl, I've really enjoyed this podcast. Thank you so much for coming on. Best of luck with Serify Energy. I think it's a great project you're doing, and I think I'm a believer now, Karl.
Good. Good man. I'm glad.
Thanks for your time. What do you think, ladies and gents? Let us know on social media. Get in touch. Are you involved? If you're a business, check out the website. It's CERAPHI, Cerify Energy. Have a look at them and see what they're doing. And, maybe Carl can drill a hole in your car park and give you some unlimited earth heat. Thanks very much to Zoe for production. We'll catch you on the next episode of the Net Hero podcast soon.
You've just heard the Net Hero podcast from FutureNetZero.com. Join us as we help you find ways to cut your carbon footprint as we head towards net zero. Subscribe and follow us on social media. FutureNetZero.com. Better business, better planet.